April 1912 saw the world watch in horror as the Titanic vanished into the North Atlantic. But while that ship became a legend of the abyss, she had a younger, larger sister designed specifically to learn from those fatal mistakes. This was the Britannic, the crowning achievement of the White Star Line, which now lies at the bottom of the Aegean Sea. Unlike the Titanic, which is a mangled, decaying grave over 2 miles down, the Britannic is a massive, intact time capsule. She is the largest passenger ship on the ocean floor and has become a high-stakes target for multi-million-dollar salvage opportunities and elite divers. To understand this wreck, you have to understand the hubris of her construction. After the Titanic disaster, the White Star Line added a double internal hull and raised the bulkheads so she could survive the flooding of 6 compartments. They installed massive, crane-like gantry davits capable of launching lifeboats even if the ship was listing heavily. By the time she was finished, the 48,000-ton Britannic was arguably the safest ship ever built, yet she never carried a single paying passenger. The outbreak of the Great War in 1914 saw the British Admiralty requisition the ship, stripping away her luxury fittings to make room for 3,300 hospital beds. Painted bright white with a massive green stripe and red crosses, the HMHS Britannic served as a floating hospital, ferrying wounded soldiers from the Gallipoli campaign. On the morning of November 21st, 1916, near the Greek island of Kea, a massive explosion rocked the starboard side. Captain Charlie Bartlett immediately ordered the watertight doors closed, but the ship's engineering was defeated by human nature and physics. Because it was breakfast time, the nurses had opened the portholes for ventilation. As the ship settled, these acted like straws, sucking the sea into the upper decks. Furthermore, the explosion had warped the hull just enough that the watertight doors failed to seal. The unsinkable ship was dying, and she was doing it fast, taking only 55 minutes to disappear compared to the Titanic's 2 hours and 40 minutes. The final moments of the Britannic were marked by a horrific event known as the Propeller Massacre. In a desperate attempt to beach the ship on the nearby shore, Captain Bartlett kept the engines running. He was unaware that panicked crew members had already launched lifeboats. As the bow sank and the stern rose, the massive spinning bronze propellers broke the surface, creating a meat grinder that sucked in and destroyed 2 lifeboats. Of the 30 people who died that day, nearly all perished in those blades. Among the survivors was Violet Jessup, a stewardess who had remarkably survived both the collision of the Olympic and the sinking of the Titanic. At 9:07 a.m., the Britannic capsized and hit the seabed while her stern was still above the water, because her 882-foot length was double the depth of the 400-foot channel. She settled on her starboard side, hiding the secret of whether a torpedo or a mine truly took her down, waiting in total darkness for 60 years until Jacques Cousteau would eventually rediscover her. For 6 decades, the Britannic remained a ghost of the Aegean, known only to local fishermen who complained of their nets snagging on something massive beneath the waves. It wasn't until 1975 that the legendary Jacques Cousteau, aboard the Calypso, utilized sidescan sonar to locate the wreck. What he found was staggering. Unlike the Titanic, which snapped in 2 and scattered a debris field over miles of the ocean floor, the Britannic lay on her side, nearly in one piece. Her massive funnel foundations were still visible, and her majestic bronze propellers, the very ones that caused the massacre in 1916, were intact and gleaming through a thin layer of silt. For the salvage world, this was a revelation. While the Titanic is essentially a rustical factory being eaten by bacteria at 12,500 feet, the Britannic sits in the Goldilocks zone of shipwrecks. At 400 feet, she is just shallow enough to be reached by human beings, but deep enough to have been protected from the destructive forces of surface waves and casual looters for over half a century. This depth, however, creates a deadly technical barrier that has earned the Britannic the nickname, the Mount Everest of wrecks. In the world of commercial and technical diving, 400 feet is a no-man's land. You cannot breathe standard air at this depth. The nitrogen becomes a potent anesthetic, causing rapture of the deep that leaves a diver as impaired as if they had consumed a bottle of whiskey. To survive, divers must use trimix, a complex blend of helium, nitrogen, and oxygen. Even then, the physical toll is immense. A diver might spend only 20 minutes exploring the wreck, but they must spend 5 to 7 hours slowly ascending to avoid the bends, hanging onto a decompression line while the cold currents of the Aegean Channel batter their bodies. The risk is not theoretical. Since the wreck was discovered, several world-class divers have lost their lives attempting to penetrate her corridors, proving that even in death, the Britannic remains as dangerous as she was on the morning she sank. The true gold mine of the Britannic isn't just in her physical hull, but in the mystery of her cargo and the controversy of her sinking. For years, rumors persisted that the ship was secretly carrying a massive cache of munitions to the Middle East, which would have made her a legitimate target for the German Navy and explained the secondary explosion that sent her down so quickly. Proving this theory would require a salvage operation unlike any other, penetrating the deepest, most dangerous boiler rooms and cargo holds. But beyond the potential for historical artifacts, there is the raw value of the ship itself. The Britannic contains thousands of tons of high-grade, early 20th century steel and massive phosphor bronze components. In the 1990s, the wreck was actually purchased by a private maritime historian, Simon Mills, for a mere £15,000. It is one of the only major shipwrecks in the world that is privately owned, turning a sovereign war grave into a unique piece of real estate that has sparked decades of legal battles over salvage rights and tourist expeditions. As salvage technology has evolved from Cousteau's basic submersibles to modern remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, and saturation diving, the Britannic has become a testing ground for the future of deep-sea recovery. Comparing her to the HMS Edinburgh, a ship salvaged of its gold bars at 800 feet, the Britannic represents a more complex challenge because of her size and structural integrity. She isn't just a pile of scrap. She is a 4-block-long building lying on its side. Every expedition that enters her hull faces a labyrinth of collapsing bulkheads and silt-covered stairs. Yet, the allure of what lies inside, the untouched medical equipment, the personal effects of the 1,000 people on board, and the definitive proof of what caused the explosion, continues to draw million-dollar investments. The Britannic is the bridge between the impossible depths of the Titanic and the accessible wrecks of the shore, making her the ultimate prize for those who possess the capital and the courage to claim her secrets. The central mystery of the Britannic lies in a single, devastating question. Why did a ship designed to be the pinnacle of maritime safety sink 3 times faster than her flawed sister, the Titanic? For decades, a heated debate has raged between naval historians and salvage experts over whether she was the victim of a German sea mine or a forbidden torpedo. The stakes of this argument are massive. If a torpedo sank her, it would mean the German Empire committed a war crime by targeting a protected hospital ship. If it was a mine, it was simply the tragic luck of the draw. When Jacques Cousteau first explored the bow, he noted the massive displacement of steel, but it wasn't until the 1990s and early 2000s that high-definition ROVs could penetrate the blast zone. They found the hull plates were peeled outward, a classic sign of an internal explosion. This led to an explosive theory. Was the Britannic secretly carrying illegal munitions, as the Germans had always claimed? Forensic dive teams eventually uncovered the smoking gun that settled the debate, and it didn't come from the ship's manifest, but from German naval archives. Records from the German submarine U-73, commanded by Gustav Seyss, revealed that the sub had laid a field of 12 mines in the Aegean Channel just hours before the Britannic arrived. This secondary explosion, that many survivors reported and which many assumed were illegal shells detonating, was likely a massive coal dust explosion. When the mine struck the starboard side, near the cross passage between the boiler rooms, the shock wave traveled through the ship's coal bunkers. In 1916, coal was stored in massive, dusty hold spaces. A localized blast could easily ignite the fine dust suspended in the air, creating a catastrophic thermobaric effect that tore through the internal bulkheads. This explained why the double hull failed. It was designed to stop water coming in, not a massive internal pressure wave blowing out. However, the salvage of information didn't stop at the cause of the sink. In 2003, an expedition led by Carl Spencer used advanced sonar mapping to reveal that the ship was resting on a literal minefield, with several unexploded devices still tethered to the seabed nearby. This discovery added a layer of extreme peril to any physical salvage operation. Divers weren't just battling the bends and the depth. They were swimming past century-old explosives that remained live and volatile. Despite this, the data recovered from the wreck's interior provided a chilling look at the ship's final moments. ROV footage showed that the watertight doors, which should have saved the ship, were caught in an intermediate position. They weren't fully open, but they weren't closed either. The explosion had warped the heavy tracks the doors ran on, jamming them into place and leaving the safest ship in the world completely vulnerable to the sea. The controversy also extends to the Great Porthole theory. Traditional maritime history suggested that the nurse's decision to open the windows for fresh air was the primary reason the ship foundered. But recent fluid dynamics modeling performed by salvage engineers suggests a more complex reality. Even with the portholes closed, the damage from the mine and the coal dust explosion was so extensive that the Britannic was likely doomed within 2 hours. The open portholes merely accelerated the inevitable, turning a controlled evacuation into a 55-minute race against death. This forensic realization shifted the blame from the crew to the sheer violence of the mine strike. For the older, data-sensitive audience watching these developments, it transformed the Britannic from a story of human error into a story of a machine pushed beyond its physical breaking point, a technical black swan event that no engineer in 1914 could have predicted. The future of the HMHS Britannic is currently caught in a tug-of-war between the relentless forces of nature and the ambitious dreams of high-tech salvage hunters. Unlike the Titanic, which is being consumed by Halomonas titanicae, a species of iron-eating bacteria that is literally dissolving the ship into rusticless, the Britannic resides in much warmer, shallower waters. This should, in theory, preserve her, but the Aegean Sea presents a different kind of threat: galvanic corrosion and the massive weight of the ship itself. Because the Britannic is resting on her side, the sheer gravitational force of her 48,000 tons is slowly causing the upper decks to collapse into the lower ones. Engineers who have monitored the wreck over the last 20 years have noted a significant pancaking effect in the midship section. For a salvage team, this creates a ticking clock. If a recovery of her historical treasures or her valuable raw materials is ever to happen, it must happen in the next few decades before the 800-foot gold mine becomes a flattened pile of scrap metal on the seafloor. The economic lure of the Britannic is distinct from any other shipwreck in history. While the HMS Edinburgh was salvaged for its physical cargo of gold bars, the Britannic's value is more complex. She represents a massive, low-background steel repository. Steel produced before the first atomic bomb tests in 1945 is highly prized in the scientific community for use in radiation-sensitive medical equipment and Geiger counters because it is not contaminated with atmospheric radionuclides. While modern steel production can mitigate this, virgin steel from a pre-1945 wreck is a lucrative commodity for specialized salvage firms. Furthermore, the Britannic's 3 massive propellers are made of phosphor bronze, a high-value alloy that remains almost perfectly preserved. Each propeller weighs roughly 16 tons. At current market prices for scrap bronze and the added provenance value of coming from a Titanic-class ship, a single propeller could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars on the open market. However, the gold within the Britannic isn't just metallurgical. It is cultural and archaeological. The ship was a state-of-the-art hospital, and her interior holds a massive collection of early 20th century medical technology that exists nowhere else on Earth. Deep-sea explorers have used ROVs to peer into the operating theaters and dental clinics, seeing rows of porcelain sinks, surgical tables, and cabinets still filled with glass vials, many of them likely still containing the medicines used during the Great War. For a private collector or a museum, these artifacts are priceless. This has led to the current Cold War over the wreck's ownership. Simon Mills, the British maritime historian who purchased the wreck from the UK government, has spent years navigating the Byzantine labyrinth of Greek bureaucracy. Because the ship lies in Greek territorial waters, the Greek Ministry of Culture classifies it as an underwater museum and a war grave, severely limiting what can be removed. This legal stalemate has given rise to the concept of the virtual salvage. Instead of physically raising the ship or its artifacts, high-tech firms are now using photogrammetry to create a millimeter-accurate 3D digital twin of the Britannic. By taking over 20,000 high-resolution photos in a single expedition, divers can digitally salvage the ship, allowing historians to walk through the corridors in VR without disturbing a single barnacle. This data is the new gold, sold to production companies, VR developers, and research institutions. It satisfies the hunger of the data-sensitive audience, those older veterans and history buffs who want to see every rivet and bulkhead, while respecting the sanctity of the 30 souls who perished in the propeller massacre. It is a way to mine the ship for every bit of its historical value without ever touching a wrench to its hull. Yet, there are still those who argue for a physical salvage of the Britannic's most iconic features. There have been serious proposals to raise one of the massive gantry davits, the towering crane-like structures that set the Britannic apart from the Titanic. These structures are engineering marvels of the Edwardian era, and bringing one to the surface would provide a tangible link to the Olympic class of liners that changed the world. The challenge is the Kia Current. The channel where the Britannic lies is essentially a high-speed underwater river. Moving a heavy lift barge into position and holding it steady while divers or ROVs attempt to cut through century-old steel is a logistical nightmare that would cost tens of millions of dollars. To turn a profit on such an operation, a salvage company would need a guarantee of high-value returns, something the Britannic, with its lack of a documented gold room, cannot easily provide on paper. The ethical debate also looms large. The Britannic is the final resting place for men who died in the service of the British Empire. Many argue that any attempt to mine the ship for profit is a desecration. However, the counter-argument is that by doing nothing, we are allowing the sea to destroy a piece of history. Unlike the Titanic, which is too deep for any practical preservation, the Britannic is at a depth where cathodic protection, attaching sacrificial anodes to the hull to stop corrosion, is actually possible. There's a growing movement to salvage the ship's longevity by treating her as an underwater monument, maintaining her structure rather than letting it rot. This would involve a continuous human presence at the site, effectively turning the wreck into an underwater park for the world's most elite technical divers, with trails marked through the safer parts of the ship. As we look to the next 50 years, the Britannic will remain the ultimate benchmark for deep-sea exploration. She is a reminder of a time when we believed technology could conquer the elements, only to find that nature always has the final say. Whether she is eventually salvaged for her steel, stripped for her medical artifacts, or simply allowed to collapse into the sands of the Kia Channel, her story serves as the necessary epilogue to the Titanic legend. She was the sister who was built to be perfect, but found that even perfection has a breaking point. For the treasure hunters, the historians, and the technical divers who risk their lives to reach her, the Britannic isn't just a shipwreck. She is a 48,000-ton puzzle waiting to be solved, a gold mine of human drama and engineering failure that continues to pay dividends to anyone brave enough to descend into the 400-foot darkness. In the end, the Britannic's greatest value may be its role as a cautionary tale. It stands as a monument to the transition from the Edwardian age of luxury to the brutal industrial reality of the world wars. Every rivet in her hull was designed for peace, yet she was taken by a machine of war. As the salvage technology of the 2020s catches up to the dreams of the 1916 engineers, we are finally able to see the ship as she truly is, not just a wreck version of the Titanic, but a masterpiece of human ambition that refused to stay forgotten. The 800-foot gold mine is still there, resting on her side, a silent giant in the blue Aegean, waiting for the next generation to decide her fate. Whether we take her treasures or leave her in peace, the Britannic has already achieved what she was built for. She has become immortal.